might have saved them all. No, I cannot stop my tears, for today I still can't hear the words and deeds that might have saved them all.
Or that indifference is not an option, just as racism is not, just as evil is not. But that is true also of education. The opposite of knowledge is not ignorance, but indifference. The opposite of beauty is not ugliness, but indifference. The opposite of life is not death, but indifference to life and death.
The world will say goodbye to one of the most well-known survivors of the Holocaust, Elie Wiesel. The Nobel Prize winner died at the age of 87. He's remembered for the best-selling memoir, Night, which has sold millions of copies and has been translated into 30 different languages. CBS 2's Jessica Layton has more.
He was an author, an activist, and a teacher.
I belong to a traumatized generation, haunted by the world's indifference.
Determined to make sure others wouldn't be haunted by the horror of the inhumane treatment he and millions of other Jews endured at Nazi concentration camps. Elie Wiesel devoted his life to fighting against injustice and oppression of all kinds. His life story and the stories he'd go on to write touched generations of people. Romanian-born, Wiesel became a U.S. citizen in 1963, eventually choosing to call New York City home. That sort of eye-opening effect and the more than 50 other books he wrote helped earn Wiesel the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986. Named a messenger of peace by the United Nations, Wiesel was always aiming to teach others.
Will the world ever learn?
Born in 1928 in what is now Romania, Wiesel was just 15 years old when he and his family were seized by the Nazis and sent to Auschwitz. Never shall I forget that first night, he later wrote, which has turned my life into one long night. Transferred later to Buchenwald, the now 16-year-old Wiesel was among the prisoners freed by Allied forces in April 1945. Late for his parents and for one of his 3 sisters. With his rescue came a moral burden, as he described years later in a CBS interview.
The question was, why did I survive? Why I? Every survivor had that question, and every survivor is haunted by that question to this day.
For Wiesel, the answer was to devote his life to fighting intolerance, while ensuring that no one ever forget the crimes of the Holocaust. He wrote dozens of books, founded the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity, and championed the cause of Israel. In 1986, Wiesel was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. A messenger to mankind, the Nobel citation reads in part, his message is one of peace, atonement, and human dignity. Elie Wiesel was 87.
His experiences in Buchenwald and Auschwitz later became the basis of a memoir, Night. He told Charlie Rose in 2002 why he wrote the book.
When I entered that place, I was convinced I would not leave alive.
Right.
I was sure I would die. And here I am, and there I was, alive. I felt I have to bear witness.
Night has been translated into over 30 languages and has sold more than 10 million copies. It was first published in 1958.
He spoke truth to power with ease and grace.
Sarah Bloomfield is director of the U.S. Holocaust Museum. Wiesel was its founding chairman.
Elie believed that the greatest sin in the world was indifference, and he devoted his life to making sure that no one's future would be like his past.
Our lives no longer belong to us, no longer belong to us alone. They belong to all those who need us desperately.
Despite all the accolades, Wiesel says he never found answers to many of his lifelong questions.
Have we learned? Apparently not. Had we learned, there would have been no Bosnia, no Cambodia, no Rwanda, and no Darfur today. If Auschwitz couldn't cure the world of anti-Semitism, what could, and what can, and what will cure the world?
He accompanied President Obama and German Chancellor Angela Merkel when they visited Buchenwald in 2009. For Weisel, it was a moment full of pain, but also possibility.
My favorite words are, and yet.
And yet?
And yet, we must go on working and fighting and being sensitive to other people's pain, other people's woes, other people's hopes.
He was a teacher. I think that's the role that he wanted to be remembered by, is a teacher, a wordsmith, a person that stuck to what his responsibilities were.
He wanted to learn along with the students, and he wanted to learn from students. The classes were on all kinds of subjects, and he was teaching Shakespeare and classical Greek text. Camus was a favorite of his. And he would allow teaching fellows to draw up reading lists so that he could learn what they were interested in studying. He really appreciated the younger generation. He loved his students, and they could feel it.
Elie was unique. From the moment he stepped on the stage, he was never introduced. He would walk out of the stage at the 92nd Street Y, sit down at a desk or a table, and then start to talk.
Oh, do I love Isaac? I love him because he suffered so much, probably.
The sacrifice of Isaac was a kind of masterpiece. He described the part where Isaac said, where's the sacrifice? You know, those kinds of things that really brought the audience with him. It was like he was there, we were there, and we were following him.
I love Isaac because what happens to him seems unjust to me. If Abraham and God had a problem in their relation, Isaac did not. And yet he endured meaningless agony on the altar, which he and his father were ordered to build. From any angle we view the event, my sympathy goes to Isaac. Doesn't he remain in our collective memory as our first survivor?
I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We always must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented.
In the small Romanian town of Sighet, life was simple. Young Eliezer spent his days in Talmudic study, mystical exploration, and prayer. His mother, Sarah, ignited his soul with Hasidic tales. On Shabbat evenings, he and his father, Shlomo, joined throngs of devout Jews in the synagogue.
I spent most of my time talking to God more than to people. He was my partner, my friend, my teacher, my king, my sovereign, that nothing else mattered.
But then, darkness. Nazi troops invaded Hungary in March 1944, and Eliezer's universe dissolved. The ghetto, 80 souls in a cattle car, and then the horrific destination. Entering the gates of hell, Elie Weisel was sent to the left.
Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp that turned my life into one long night. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever, those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never.
From Auschwitz to another hell, Buchenwald. It was not until a year later, in April 1945, that the United States Third Army arrived at the gates of Buchenwald.
A young Jewish boy from a small town in the Carpathian Mountains woke up
in a place of eternal infamy called Buchenwald. He was finally free, but there was no joy in his heart. He thought there never would be again.
After the war, Elie Weisel traveled to Paris to study literature, philosophy, and psychology at the Sorbonne. At the age of 19, he took up journalism, working as an international correspondent for an Israeli newspaper, Yediot Achronot. Weisel immigrated to New York in 1955 and wrote for a Yiddish paper. His initial Holocaust memoir, Night, was published in France in 1958. But his anguished demand to know what had become of his God hung over him like an ominous cloud. French author François Mauriac testified that, in Weisel's eyes, he observed the death of God in the soul of a child. Meanwhile, in nearby Brooklyn, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who suffered tragic loss as a result of the Holocaust, had assumed leadership of the Chabad movement and was rebuilding a world. Yiddish journalist Gershon Jacobson urged Weisel to visit the new Rebbe, and so the stage was set for an encounter and relationship that would reverberate throughout Weisel's life, altering the barren landscape of his soul.
I saw the Rebbe at work, and that was enough. I saw him. And I realized that all the tsar in the world, all the pain in the world, all the Jewish you saw him in the world, were on his face. He came back as often as possible, as I could.
In the early 1960s, Weisel scheduled a Yechidus, a personal audience with the Rebbe. He arrived with questions, accusations, anger, and sadness. Rebbe, I asked, how can you believe in God after Auschwitz? He looked at me in silence for a long moment, his hands resting on the table. Then he replied in a soft, barely audible voice, how can you not believe in God after Auschwitz? Hadn't man abdicated his privileges and duties? Apart from God, what was there in a world darkened by Auschwitz? I tried to smile, but failed. Reflecting later in life, Elie wrote, that was a turning point in my writing, that simple dialogue. The dialogue continued for years. Weisel's anger smothered his belief. How could faith's flame survive the smoke of Auschwitz? But the Rebbe saw no contradiction. He viewed Weisel's anguished questions as expressions of faith. In a remarkable April 1965 letter to Weisel, the Rebbe articulated his proposed prosecution of God. The complaint, shall not the judge of all the earth do justice, can be authentic and can have its proper force only when it breaks forth from the pain-filled heart of a deep believer. So long as the question is asked with integrity, it is logical that such a deep feeling can come only from the conviction that true justice stems from something higher than both human intellect and human feeling. But after the initial tempestuous assault, he has to realize that the entire approach on which the question is based, and of wishing to understand with the intellect that which is higher than the intellect, is something that cannot take place. Moreover, he must, after a rattling outrage and a thorough grieving, ultimately come to the conclusion, nevertheless, I believe, ani mamen. On the contrary, even more strongly. The Rebbe insisted that a Jew can prosecute God for Auschwitz, but to do so, we must believe that God is there, and that God is inherently benevolent. In his subsequent memoir, All Rivers Run to the Sea, Weisel restated his position on questioning God. I have never renounced my faith in God. I have risen against his justice, protested his silence, and sometimes his absence. But my anger rises up within faith and not outside it. I admit that this is hardly an original position. It is part of Jewish tradition. Abraham and Moses, Jeremiah, and Reb Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev teach us that it is permissible for man to accuse God, provided it be done in the name of faith in God. If that hurts, so be it. Sometimes we must accept the pain of faith so as not to lose it. Weisel's resurrection of faith was astonishing. He had vowed in fury to never forget those flames that consumed my faith forever, those moments that murdered my God. And yet, with sensitivity and persistence, the Rebbe taught him how to believe again and how to begin again. In letters and in person, the Rebbe gently encouraged Elie to settle down, marry, and begin a family. There could be no greater repudiation of Hitler, the Rebbe wrote. And in 1969, he fulfilled the Rebbe's blessing literally.
When I got married in Jerusalem, the most beautiful bouquet of flowers I received in my life, probably, was a Rebbe's.
HaMoshiach, ani ma'amin. Bevias HaMoshiach, bevias HaMoshiach, ani ma'amin. Ani ma'amin. HaMoshiach, ani ma'amin. Bevias HaMoshiach, bevias HaMoshiach, ani ma'amin.
There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time we fail to protest.
Elie was in many respects a great man, but what made him so approachable is that in some respects he was just a very ordinary man, but a very ordinary man who had been tempered in a dreadful furnace of experience. Elie became who he was only because of the dreadful experience of the Holocaust.
If Elie were sitting here today, he would say, I don't speak for all survivors. Every survivor speaks for themselves, and no one speaks for the victims. Having said that, his prominence did catapult a movement into national and international recognition that was vitally important.
He knew that understanding the Holocaust both honored and gave meaning to the people who lived in the past, but could also unlock some insights about how to better manage the future. He was doing, through a lifetime, what he was encouraging other people to do.
Elie very definitely believed that all of humanity had a great deal to learn from the Holocaust. He was writing out of a desire for truth, I think, and I think he felt he was obliged to be as productive as he was because he was a survivor.
Much depends on us, on our sense of justice and integrity, on our dedication to truth, on our willingness to share our innermost memories. And we, survivors, have promised that we shall try.
Mankind must remember that power is not God's gift to his creatures. Peace is our gift to each other.
What a place.
Yeah, what a place. What a place. What is it even coming back now? Difficult?
Each time I come, I try not to speak for a day or two or three. And just to go back and find the silence that was in me then. And I say to myself, how many of us did not live and simply vanished? Look at this place. The immensity of the place. It's a universe. And when you think of the numbers, 1.5 million people, just think country or a city that has 1.5 million inhabitants and simply vanishes. And so I think of that. I come here and try to see the invisible and try to hear the inaudible. And I always see what I had seen the last time I was here.
Do you think that the ground it carries its own energy here? It has the voices of the dead, do you think?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced of that. That some voices are still here. Mm-hmm. I think the souls are here. I think that they listen, they cry, they warn. Look, this is the largest cemetery in recorded history. And what do you see? Nothing.
Nothing.
But the cemetery is in our heart.
Yes, it's huge.
Huge.
I am stunned at the vastness of it. It's huge.
It was meant to be huge in order to receive so many millions of people.
Yeah.
I remember the first impression I had when I came was at night, midnight, and it was with all the lights on, projectors, dogs, shepherds, German shepherds, assessed with machine guns, but the vastness, that not only to madness, we adjusted to death. Mm-hmm. It's not that we lived with the dead. Mm-hmm. You know, you went to sleep in the morning, somebody was at your side, was dead. It's not it. We lived inside death.
I see. You know, you can talk about it in the big grand terms and themes of, obviously, the Holocaust and the devastation and the 6 million and the number of people and the horror and all of that. But there's something about standing in a room with the shoes that not only humanizes, but personalizes it in a way that you see yourself. How significant a pair of shoes becomes, because behind every shoe is life, is a person. It's
elegant shoes, poor shoes. You see, these shoes could tell the stories of the lives of those who walked in them. Imagine what they would say.
Yeah. Red shoes.
Yes, red shoes, right? That's probably a dancer.
Probably a dancer.
Yeah.
You're brought to the sobering realization that each one of those shoes represents somebody's life. And that just is piercing in a way that the big picture of it does not. You can hear the words, you can know the story, you can know the history, you can know that. Something about the shoes, I gotta tell you, that makes it real. Well, you know, I'm trying to make sense of it all. It's a lot to take in.
Whenever people could try to conduct such experiments against other people, we must be there to shout and say, no, we remember.
No, we remember.
Nobody would have imagined that such a crime could be conceived and implemented in a human mind. That is why, by the way, some people didn't believe it, even though it happened in their lifetime, even while it happened. So therefore, wherever and whenever a project even similar or close to similar to that project that Hitler had for the Jews and some other people, we must immediately do whatever we can to stop it, to denounce it first, to disarm the perpetrators, to be, and to create a world in which their project could not come to fruition. When we say never again, what does it mean, never again? I believe firmly and profoundly that anyone who listens to a witness becomes a witness. So those who hear us, those who read us, those who learn something from us, they will continue to bear witness for us. Until now, they are doing it with us. At a certain point in time, they will do it for all of us. Some students ask me, what will happen when all the survivors will be gone? The teacher in me says to my student, just think, perhaps you are the only hope I have.
I have learned 2 lessons in my life. First, there are no sufficient literary, psychological, or historical answers to human tragedy, only moral ones. Second, just as despair can come to one another only from other human beings, hope can also be given to one by other human beings.
The mission that you feel in 30 books, and all that you have, the attention you have received, what drives you in part is to make sure that memory of the Holocaust remains what?
Remains a burning and luminous scar on our very being, now until the end of times. How? I believe that the goal of teaching, of writing, is to sensitize the reader, to sensitize the pupil, to sensitize each other. I would like to create sensitivity, a heightened sensitivity, a heightened awareness of the other in those who read me or those who hear me. Otherwise, memory could be a static memory.
So at some point we say there was a terrible war between 1940 and 1945 in which millions of people were killed.
6 million Jews were
including
massacred.
6 million, and then at some point it's no longer 6 million Jews, it's 20 million people were killed, and there were terrible inhumanities committed. And there's no mention of Jews, and there's no mention of
forgotten.
Auschwitz, and all of a sudden it fails in the memory other than.
A sentence, man's humanity to man.
It was a time of man's inhumanity, the most obscene inhumanity of all time.
No, I would like the faces that I have seen, the fires that I have watched from a very near distance should not be extinguished. Neither the faces nor the fires. I would like the tears that I have shed, that I have seen others shed, should not be lost in the sand of the desert.
You knew Yitzhak Rabin. You were there in '67 at the war.
We spoke about it.
We spoke about this 2 days ago. Tell me finally, what worries you the most about the future of your country?
This is my country.
I know, I don't mean it that way, but this country that you love and your people.
It's the same thing that I worry about, really, with regard to other people in other countries. It's fanaticism.
Fanaticism.
Yeah. Just imagine nuclear fanaticism. It's possible. You know, I met recently the director of the FBI, who became a very close friend, Louis Freeh. He's a marvelous human being. You should have him on your program. And we spoke about nuclear terrorism. And I said, you know, when I was younger, 30 years ago, a friend took me to see a computer. It filled 2 rooms. Now you take a computer, you put it in your pocket.
Yeah.
It's possible that 10 years from now,
a nuclear explosive
in a attaché case. That's exactly it.
But fanaticism, it's not the weapon.
Oh no!
It is the fanaticism of the mind. You know? Sure. And you said here on this program, a Jew killed a Jew in Israel, a prime minister, a general, and shot him
in the back.
In the back. How could that happen?
Fanaticism. Fanaticism. Whatever really happened, bad things that happen now in recent years, that you try to trace them back, you will see it is always fanaticism. It's not only religious fanaticism, it's ethnic fanaticism in Bosnia.
Fanaticism started, in which you have written about eloquently, and it is fanaticism that started World War I, and fanaticism started World War II.
Always fanaticism.
Okay. You think there's fanaticism in this country?
Absolutely.
From the right, from the left?
From the right, even from the left, but maybe from the right, and these are very dangerous people.
Driven by religious?
Racism.
And racism.
Racism. There it's racism.
Anti-Semitism, racism?
Always. Whenever people hate, they always find a place to hate a Jew too.
To blame.
First the Jew also. They hate rich, put in a few Jews. They hate the black, put in a few Jews too. They always hate Jews.
Why is
but
that?
Not only Jews. Because we are the scapegoat. Some say because we were the conscience 3,000 years ago of humanity. Because we are alive. They cannot understand. Logically, our people should have disappeared. There wasn't a time, there wasn't a method when Jews were not in danger since 3,500 years. And they can't understand. What are you doing here? We don't want you. Go away.
How do you feel about this project that Steven Spielberg?
It's an important one. Spielberg is a great movie maker. And
he's recording the testimony
some 50,000
pictures
survivors. He chose 50,000 survivors. Yes, people everywhere, and it's important for the archive. It's important for memory. Sure. Whatever we do for the cause for the sake of memory, I'm for it.
Has there ever been a day in your life that you didn't think?
No.
Not one day?
Not one, but it doesn't prevent me from laughing,
yes,
from singing,
from loving,
from being, celebrating friendship and be with my wife, my son, my friends.
You are a shy man, they say.
Very
You are-
shy.
Yeah. You quote Pascal as saying, what's that great line about God says I.
Le moi est haïssable in French. The I is hateful. Only God can say I.
But in a sense, your work is all about memory and, in a sense, all ground in your own experience.
Not really, Charlie, because I have written very little about the Holocaust.
Not memoir, but if it's someone else's stories, it comes out of the passion of your life.
The passion for learning. I've written about the Bible, I've written about the Talmud, about Hasidism, about Messianism, I've written plays, I've written cantatas, I've written novels.
Well, is that why you haven't written this until now? Exactly. Is this why you couldn't go back to your village until now and write about it until now?
Because it was very deep in me, and I didn't want to take it out yet. Before you write, you must acquire an intensity and work on it. And the intensity must at one point explode. And when it explodes, you write. And we stay.
And contribute. Elie Wiesel, Memories, All Rivers Run to the Sea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח ויף על פי שיתממך אחכה לו.
He was not constrained by politics. He was not constrained by any pressures. He was a free man. And he used that freedom to speak out wherever he thought his voice should be heard or his voice would be effective.
Elie was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal by President Reagan. And the week that he was going to be awarded the medal was the week the whole episode of Bitburg reached the newspapers. Reagan was going to go to Germany for a state visit, and he was asked by President Kohl to visit a cemetery of German soldiers, and it turns out that there were Waffen-SS soldiers buried in that cemetery. There was so much publicity about the medal ceremony that NBC broadcast the Elie speech live at 11:30 that Friday morning. And Elie's famous words in that speech were, "Mr. President, that place is not your place."
Your place is with the victims of the SS. Oh, we know there are political and strategic reasons. But this issue, as all issues related to that awesome event, transcends politics and diplomacy. The issue here is not politics, but good and evil.
Human beings should be held accountable. Leave God alone. He has enough problems.
I used to be a choir conductor. And I will sing you a song only for you. And you will. It's a song which I learned when I was your age, actually. Shepshivleinu tachavanu vayifrekeinu mitzareinu Shepshivleinu tachavanu vayifrekeinu mitzareinu Shepshivleinu zachalanu hoy vayifrekeinu mitzareinu Shepshivleinu zachalanu kileyolam tahaso Shepshivleinu In the next 10 minutes, I'm given 10 minutes, already 9. I will try and give you a few words that would simply reflect what I have tried to do with so many years of my life. First of all, remember that I am a teacher and a writer. The writer in me is a teacher, the teacher in me is a writer. As a writer, I learn, and as a teacher, I try to teach. But my passion for learning is what sustained me for many decades. I still am learning, and I confess to you, you may be disappointed, but in my university where I teach, Boston University, I love small classes. You are not a small class. But as you heard from Heather, that moments, life, remember that, life is not made of years, but of moments. Great moments, dark moments, sad moments, triumphant moments, the first time you meet each other, the first time you discover Shakespeare or Plato, the first time you are taken by a story written by someone that you never met, and that story takes you far away in time and in space and in life. But for this moment, which is ours now, I envy you. To begin is a mystery to me. That all of a sudden life changes because of that beginning. The first time you read a novel, the first time you have a teacher that inspires you, the first time you experience joy, true joy, simply by meeting a fellow student, the first time you feel the first beginning, the first sign of love, and the first time you acquire knowledge, and you know that that knowledge is something that is important in life, as it was in mine. Look, what have I learned? Small things, first of all. You say, free the children. The emphasis is on freedom. Are you free? Probably, to a limit. But remember, your freedom should never be at the expense of someone who has no freedom. Remember, you are not free simply to accept racism. Racism is ugly. Racism is stupid. Racism is absurd. Especially racism is never an option for culture. One day you may open one of my books and you will see that although I have written more than 50 books, but actually what Heather said is true, night is the first. And if you begin with night, you will see that when I was your age, the world was a different world. At that time, totalitarian power existed in the world. On one hand, communism with its dark laboratories of death, and on the other hand, Nazism with its factories of death. And therefore, when you will have read it, you will ask yourselves, how did I, the person who speaks to you, manage not to survive? That was an accident. I have never done anything to survive. It is simply, if you are religious, you would say by miracle or by chance. But the fact is, how could one survive and speak about humanity and speak about faith, faith in culture, faith in civilization? Now you heard Heather again quoting me that I am against indifference. You cannot enter a classroom with indifference. You are in your classrooms with your friends, future friends, and what do you learn? Not only that truth can never be an abstraction, but it must be part of a human being. You look around you, look at the neighbor sitting next to you. That young boy or girl may be a future Nobel Prize winner. Who else can tell you that but me? It's possible. Why not? It's all something that depends not on destiny but on yourself. It's not that you would want to win a prize, but you will do so many things in physics or in medicine for the welfare of humanity that you will get such a prize. But even if you don't get it, the fact that you are here to support and to help and to love and to assist and to explore on a journey with a person, another person, boy or girl, that's already a reward in itself. But what will you remember? You will remember, therefore, that indifference is not an option, just as racism is not, just as evil is not. I said that the opposite of love is not hate but indifference, but that is true also of education. The opposite of knowledge is not ignorance but indifference. The opposite of beauty is not ugliness but indifference. The opposite of life is not death but indifference to life and death. So there are so many things that you are learning from each other, with each other. What I had to overcome is to see in the other in the street, in the passerby, not an enemy, but a fellow sojourner. Not an enemy, but a friend, a companion, someone whose hand, when it is open, is a gift in itself. You will learn that nothing in the world justifies death. We are told that death is a blemish on creation. It is surely true, but remember that life is sacred, and therefore life cannot be replaced. Functions can be replaced, but not life. In my town, when they came, the enemy came, and we said to each other, it's impossible, they will not take all of us away, since so many doctors are in my town, so many pharmacists, so many cobblers. How can they live without us? And the enemy said, everyone is replaceable. Nonsense! Human beings are not replaceable. And so, a few words that I will simply give you as the lesson I have learned. When you will have read maybe some of my books, or come to my school and learned with me, what will remain, what I want to remain in you and with you, is simply that whatever you will do in life, whatever endeavor you will undertake, and wherever the road, the destiny will take you, remember these few words. Always think higher and feel deeper. Think higher meaning that simple things have their own beauty, and feel deeper meaning feel deeper about one another. When I see a child, the sadness of that child darkens my universe, and the smile of that child gives me more hope than I can get from myself. But then this is the mystery of hope. It is like peace. It is not gift to one another, God's gift, but the gift that one gives to one another. So I offer you the idea that you will find, of course, despair in books. It's okay, because you will overcome them. You will find other books who will surmount that despair. But never accept to be a despair to someone else. That means, let not your hope be at the expense of another person's despair. If I am responsible for your despair, I am guilty and unworthy. I want you to remember these moments that we spent together today as moments of possible and necessary joy, but above all, of extraordinary moments of promise, of an extraordinary promise, of hope. We are each other's hope.
All happened so fast. The ghetto, the decrees, the persecutions, the deportation, the sealed cattle car, the fiery altar upon which the history of my people and the future of mankind were meant to be sacrificed. I remember that young boy asked his father, "Tell me," he said, "can this be true? This is the 20th century after all. This is not the Middle Ages. Who would allow such crimes to be committed? And how could the world remain silent?"
In May, the Germans began deportations from Siget to Auschwitz. Upon their arrival at the camp, the Weisel family was separated. His mother and younger sister Tzipora were sent directly to the gas chambers, while Elie and his father were sent to the Auschwitz III labor camp. When the Russian army neared Auschwitz, Elie and his father were taken on a long death march and arrived in Buchenwald in central Germany. Shlomo, his father, died within a few days, and Elie survived until the liberation of the camp in April 1945.
In 2006, you and I walked the grounds of Auschwitz together, actually on my 52nd birthday.
I remember that. What a gift I gave you, right?
That was
But it
something.
was a gift.
Yeah. You had written 47 books at the time, and you said that you hadn't begun yet. Do you still feel that way now?
Always.
I remember hearing that and thinking,
Always, absolutely.
Really?
Every day, I ask myself the same question. What have I done? Is it enough? Does it justify all that I wanted to accomplish and to do? But I'm not sure of anything.
Wow. I'm going to get to that, more of that in a moment, because when I read this powerful little book, Open Heart, I couldn't believe that you were still questioning that. But when we were in Poland, I remember you said that the souls who perished at Auschwitz were still there, that they listen. Do you think that the ground speak, it carries its own energy here? It has the voices of the dead, do you think?
I think the souls are here. I think that they listen, they cry, they warn. Look, this is the largest cemetery in recorded history. And what do you see? Nothing.
Nothing.
But the cemetery is in our heart. You know, I have in my pocket the picture of my little sister, which I've never spoken about, not even with you. The only time I cry is not when I speak about my parents, but I speak about my little sister. Mm-hmm. There, she makes me cry.
How old was she?
7.
She was 7. She was 7 when you went to the camp. I know, I remember walking the grounds with you and us standing there, the two of us standing there and looking at the way your sister had gone. Where were you separated from your little sister and your mother?
There, I think there, yeah. And my sisters, with the 2 older sisters, my grandmother, and my little sister, I remember her because she had a red coat that she got for holiday.
A little red coat?
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's when I saw them disappear all of a sudden. They went left, they went right. They went to the crematorium. Mm-hmm. That was the crematorium.
Why do you think it is, speaking of her, that still brings the tears? Because of a life unfulfilled, unlived? Why? What?
Why the children, my God, why the children? You know, that 1.5 million children were killed. Then, like that, straight from the train. Do you know what they have done to humanity? How many among them could have grown up to become scientists, physicians, poets, scholars, friends of humanity, saviors of the world? What they have done to the world.
There is divine beauty in learning, just as there is human intolerance. To learn means to accept the postulate that life did not begin at my birth. Others have been here before us, and I walk in their footsteps.
The great French poet Paul Valéry said, the future isn't what it used to be. And the question, of course, is, was it ever? Here in Jerusalem, it's difficult to be a prophet, simply because we know we had prophets. All of them had a tragic end. Not one of them was happy. So why should one be a prophet? On the other hand, of course, we know that you spoke a lot about globalization. I hear this word and I know that globalization has not really become reality, except all of a sudden we discover global terror. It began, as always, in this land. The suicide terrorist, which is the worst of all, began in Israel against Jews. Not against military people, but against children, their parents, their grandparents. It began, and then, because it wasn't stopped globally, it spread to other countries, including Muslim countries. Now it's everywhere. The danger is there. What does it stem from? Fanaticism. Now we know there is global fanaticism. Well, we lived with global fanaticism before. There was political fanaticism in Moscow, racial fanaticism in Berlin, and in the Middle Ages we had religious fanaticism. And now we are going back to the Middle Ages, and that is the danger. Fanaticism is hatred, the hatred of the other, the hatred of and against anyone who is not me. And there we have a lesson. We gave that lesson. Admit it, in 1945, most of you are too young to remember that, you weren't even born. In 1945, the Jewish people had an option. If we could have become filled with hatred and to say, look, we tried everything else, it didn't work. And those who had hatred had power. And therefore, tragedy that happened did happen. We could have become avengers. How really can anyone explain, sociologists or psychologists, that in 1945 there was no really a collective act or even individual, with some exceptions, act of vengeance? In Germany then, the people were afraid, they lived in fear that the Jews might come back and do to them what the enemy has done to the Jews. They lived in fear. And there was nothing that could have stopped the Jews. There was a Jewish Brigade of Palestine. At that time, Palestine meant Jewish Palestine. And the Jewish Brigade actually was forbidden to enter Germany because, again, even the British were afraid that the Jews in the brigade would become avengers. They did not. And then a very remarkable metamorphosis occurred. The Jewish people channeled all of its imaginative energies into the creation, I call it the recreation, of a Jewish state on its ancestral soil. And it became a noble endeavor to give a home to the homeless,
and to restore the injustice to what happened before and transform it into an act of justice. Justice to memory and the justice to whatever Judaism has done for humanity. You mentioned Gandhi. I am not a great admirer of Gandhi. In the beginning I was. And of course, I read his work, and then I discovered something which hurt me and hurts me to this day. I think in an exchange of letters, where he simply wrote, either in the past or in the present, the advice to the Jews in Europe, not to fight the Germans, but to commit suicide. A kind of masada, suicide, in the hundreds of thousands. And then he said, at least, he said, their death would have had meaning. Oh my God, really, really. How can one give such an advice? What does it mean? Non-violence is very nice, except when the other side uses it. Am I for violence? No. I do hope that we shall find a way here in Jerusalem, the place where we always come back to. Here in Jerusalem, we will find a way of attaining our goals with words of hope. Will we succeed? And I will leave you, I think, with one of my favorite stories. It's an old legend. It explains why we have obsessions. We too have obsessions. And our obsessions are to bring consolation to those who need it, and some joy to the joyless, some food to the hungry, and to some kind of smile to the prisoner in his or her cell. And this is the story. Once upon a time, there was a young man who decided he must change the world. But the world is so big. So he said, let's begin with my country. It's a Hasidic story. But the country is so huge. My town is big again, my street. And he said, let's do something very well and go around, agitate, militate, and said, men and women, stop it. Stop being indifferent to other people's pain. Stop stealing. Stop cheating. Stop cruelty. Stop it. In the beginning, people listened because he was the very first and only sage who came to speak to them. But after a while, they were tired because he repeated the same words. He went on shouting day after day for years. And one day he was stopped by a child in the street saying, "Dear teacher, you shout and you shout and you shout. Don't you see it's useless? People don't listen to you." He said, "Yes, I see that." "Then why do you go on shouting?" And he said, "My dear child, in the beginning I was convinced that if I were to shout loud enough, I would change them. Now I know I will not change the cruelty of the enemy. I will not. If I go on shouting louder and louder, it is because I don't want them to change me." Isn't that a goal that we all share? We, the Jewish people, have been the target of so many cultures, so many religions trying to change us. It didn't work. Assimilation, persecution, conversion, it didn't work. Why? Because we say, no matter what, we shall not change.
When I came here for the first time, 30 years ago, there were 2 lecturers on the program. The novelist Jean Shepherd read first from her work in progress, and those who came to applaud her were the majority, and they left after intermission. And I was left with a few friends. And I felt, what a pity. I shouldn't have accepted the invitation. In order to think positively and give myself courage, I counted a few friends that made the half-empty hall look even larger and emptier. And I thought I will not be invited again. Well, that too shall pass. I remember I entered the stage. I sat down in this very chair. I was supposed to say something. So I read a page from the Jews of Silence in French. Were there French-speaking listeners in this audience? What's the difference, I felt? They will not stay to the end anyway. At least they will have a good excuse for leaving. Then I read a passage from the Town Beyond the Wall with improvised commentaries. The audience suffered, so did I. And I wondered, well, when would this torment come to an end? I was eager to finish and get over it. In order to illustrate my taste for silence, I told of Beethoven, of whom it is said that he composed not only his symphonies, but also the silence that followed them. So I left the stage. For good, I thought. And here I am, 30 years later. In the same volume, which you will read next year, I'm telling of my first lecture, the real lecture, the first paid lecture I ever got. It was after I published Night. Und die Welt hat geschwiegen was published later as La Nuit in France in 1958, and here as Night in 1960. And I got a telephone call from a very beautiful voice saying, we would like you to come for a lecture in Long Island. She had such a beautiful voice, and at that time I was ready to fall in love with anyone. So I fell in love with the voice. And she said, we shall give you $100, which for me then was half of my monthly salary, and come and lecture. I said, about what? About your book, she said. Of course, we know your book, we love it. And she said, I represent a synagogue somewhere in Long Island, a women's club, men's club. And there will be 500 couples. I, as a student of the Sorbonne, was very serious about lecturing. So I decided to prepare a good lecture. Worked on it a few months, 30 pages. Everything I knew was there, you know. Spinoza and Descartes, and Lahavdil, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon. After all, I had to speak for 1,000 people, 500 women and 500 men. But I was so in love with the voice that it didn't matter. As they sent a taxi for me, and that in the taxi I asked myself, why did they invite me? There must be a case of mistaken identity. I was sure they didn't mean me. And I decided on the spot to test them. And when I came, I met the woman, a beautiful voice. I met her husband. And they brought me in the hall of that synagogue, and on the days she introduced me beautifully, you know, only as in America you can hear such introductions. Shakespeare and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky were peanuts. And she said, of course you remember, you know, she said, you know, we all love your book, and we read it, and we loved it, we adore it. And I invented a new story for it, just to see what will happen. And while I was talking, I invented a story. It happened in the 19th century. 19th century in Paris, a young girl fell in love with a boy, and she had a Catholic education, and he wasn't, and they were in trouble, and they were going to commit suicide. And the question in the book was, I said, should she commit suicide? I spoke, and I was convinced at one point somebody will say, but sir, this is not the book we read. Nobody. So I said to myself, maybe, who knows, maybe they are so timid, you know, they are so respectful, that afterwards there will be a question and answer period. And somebody will get up. there was a question and answer period. And they all asked me questions about the story I just told. Why didn't she commit suicide, and so forth. By that time I forgot what I wanted to say. Somehow I got out of it. And big applause. That's why there are no questions and answers here, as you can imagine. Then she invited me to the study of the rabbi there to give me the $100. And I said, lady, I must tell you a story. It's a Hasidic story. And she was respectful and nice. She said, please. And I said, the story, I'm sure you know it, is about a Rebbe who was invited by his Hasid to come into the next village for the circumcision. He was offered to be the Sandeik, the godfather. So how can he say no? You cannot say no to a bris. So he went, he found the only coachman in town. And the coachman had one fiacre, and with a very, very old horse. So as they left the village, they came to a hill. So the coachman left his place and began pushing. The Rebbe saw that the coachman was pushing. How can he be inside when a Jew is pushing? So he also left, and he also pushed. And they were pushing and pushing and pushing until they arrived to the next village. When they came to the next place, the Rebbe said to the coachman, look, I understand why I am here. I was invited for the bris. I understand why you are here, because you needed the money. But why did you bring the horse?